I don't reject Christian. I don't reject the biblical morality as Dr. Hartigan says in his text is functional for the species. If you believe there's a higher God, then you don't put yourself in the place of God. You don't do God-like things like destroying Nagasaki and Hiroshima. See, so that would be that's one of the good things, that if you're not acting God-like, you don't ever drop bombs on two cities and raze them right to the ground when children were playing that day. So that's one of the things, some physicists might say, hey, I don't have any Steve Weinberg and I, we're not particularly religious people in that sense. But I think he and I could both agree in conversation that if it prevented people from doing that to cities in the future, that it would be functional for belief, for scientists to have that belief. Because if they don't have that belief, they might say, well, then what stands in the way of, the biblical God did it to Gomorrah and Sodom, why can't we do it to 25 cities now? Because in 2048, they'll have the power to destroy the entire earth with what they know about physics then. So that's a danger. You see, so that doesn't cause me to be like, I believe that there's a Christian God, because that was kind of the problem with that whole event in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And it's a lot of the reason, I think, why scientists today can't believe in a God of the Old Testament or a God of Christianity or a God that is good, because he didn't prevent that. So what do you say to that? The lives of people were taken in Hitler's Germany on a daily hour after hour. They were taken and no God was intervening. And so that just strengthened the atheistical thinking of those people. But that doesn't mean that we go up to, the people who today say I'm an atheist and say, well, you would do that too. But Dick Hartigan was saying it's functional for the species, because if you do have those if you believe that that's a code that functions to preserve the species, that's not good to take other people's property or their wife or their friends, and these basic commandments. I mean, they're things that we do instinctually, so we don't need to think of them in this grander sense of there being like beings flying around the universe, or an invisible God who can make himself visible if he wants to, and a God that can act on us if we're not acting right. He can abolish our existence or whatever. There may be such a God, and I can't disprove that there is such a God. But I think that there's a good deal of absurdity in religion, because there's not frank discussion about what's going on. That priests and pastors and so on, they don't come out and they don't say, our basic idea here is that we're trying to get people to be good. And that's what we're really about. We are in doubt as much as the greatest thinkers in the world are in doubt, and everyone is in doubt about what the reality of our existence is. And so we're trying to help, and these are the doctrines that we've come up with to try to help. They wouldn't have to admit that they themselves forged anything or changed anything about history, just that's what they're doing. That people can be assured that if they go to that church, or they ask that rabbi, or they ask that pastor, or they ask that priest, then that priest says, this is really what I'm doing. That, my life is dedicated to making the lives of people better and more harmonious, and not about some other thing. Because there's a fear today that the church is trying to keep people away, like the unmasking said. It made a lot of points about how the church can as much cover over the spirituality and unity of people as it can potentiate it. So every person who's a thinking person has a reason to be questioning person of that, because maybe the church is pointing them away from things that they wouldn't, that could make them even more spiritual, even more accepting, even more tolerant, and so on. But I believe with Thomas Jefferson, I believe that if we boil Jesus' principles down just to the few things that he necessarily would have taught, and John Dominic Crossan of DePaul University also believes this, along with the members of what might be defunct now, but they used to have something called the Jesus Seminar. And when you were part of the Jesus Seminar, they'd get together every year and they'd talk about the evidence for Christ and what Christ taught and what the sources were. That particular scholar is very good because he tries to show you the layers of sources and the probabilities attached to each layer of meaning, so that if you're hearing something that Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane, then he will say, well, that source is direct because all sources agree that that source is something that Jesus said. Or he will say that's an uncertainty because that was reported by this author, and this author got it from this author, but this author's questionable. So he tries to get people on the right page, John Dominic Crossan. He tries to get people on the right page of believing, and he also tries to tell them, hey, Jesus was this guy who was a social philosopher, and he went around in Jerusalem and he tried to help people who were who were poor. They were suffering oppression because they were poor. They weren't poor in spirit; they were poor in materiality. They didn't have what the wealthy Lucretians who were ruling the Roman Empire had, So what they grasped onto, see? So that can be a thing too. That beliefs function, as this thinker I'm reading right now, Bergson of France, his belief is that he's not hostile to religious belief in the way that Sigmund Freud is, because he believes that it has a function for people to have those beliefs as a species. Similarly, my professor, Dr. Richard Shelley Hartigan, whom I do not think was a particularly religious person in the sense of believing in all the metaphysical trappings of Christianity, but he was saying when it comes down to practicality, if you adopt those religious precepts of the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, you're increasing your ability to survive because you're not encroaching on other people's territory. You're not putting yourself in the place of God, just to mention a few things, and that's good to be like that. So that's my test of Christianity and of religious belief in general. What is it directing people towards? I talked about a lot of communities earlier today when I did videos about how they can be dedicated to refurbishing antique vehicles, or they can be dedicated to dancing. They can be dedicated to sexual ritual. They can be dedicated to all kinds of things. But some of those things can lead to more selfish types of existence than others. And then when it comes to how that community impinges upon other communities or interacts with other communities, as I suggested, non-revolutionary socialism is the best today. And that kind of presupposes the Christian ethic, that you're going to be tolerant of other people that want to have 8 other houses along, separated by a block or 2 blocks in an area, and you're going to have a community. So it's a form of Jeffersonianism or Jefferson's philosophy that I'm articulating that people might reinscribe in their life today, and so they don't have to feel like they're part of some religion that's oppressing them, or part of some huge empire some monolithic empire where their word or their deeds and their speech doesn't have any meaning, because in the communities that you're forming in these experiments, these social experiments, you are making for yourself this kind of existence, and you are getting what you want out of life because you're interacting with people that you care about, and you're bringing to it some kind of idea of unity. You know, a group of philosophers or 10 philosophical thinkers or thoughtful persons who, you know, built 2 or 3 houses together and had a common area where they cooked food, where they did gardening together, where they talked about issues of the environment and other things in a non-political and non-radical way, could only make their existence better, you know. And the university today, it's not there to facilitate the kind of community that makes you feel like you're in a community. So one may very well want to do that. I believe that that's why Theodore Kisel's friend, Houston Smith, I believe this is why he used to reach out and join Indian tribes, and he would do mescaline and he would do LSD and other things with these tribes, because I think he felt spiritual and he wanted to do it with other people and he wanted to feel it, and he thought the society stigmatizes these things. So how can I do it? Well, he would go to the Indian reservations and tribes, and he would sit with the leaders of those tribes, and they would actually do it together in a spiritual community. And so that's experimenting with a new form of existence that's perfectly possible. You know, anybody who questions it, they can ask Theodore, one of the greatest scholars of Heidegger alive today, about his friend Houston Smith. I don't know whether Mr. Smith has passed away or he's still alive, but he was one of the best friends of Theodore, and on a particular day he gave a lecture at Northern about that subject, and I heard him speak, and then I talked to him about the philosophy of Eric Voegelin.